I learned so much this morning. It was quite amazing, and I hope you guys are having a good time. Don't you love this room? I mean, I can see everybody really easy from here. And when I was trying to figure out how to do this water thing, kind of my dream was how to rehydrate North America. How do we rehydrate North America? And I was looking for a Symbiosis team. And when I called Carol Evans, she says, I'm not coming without the ranchers. And when I talked to Jon Griggs, he says, you know, he's telling me about sage grouse, he's telling me about trout, he's telling me about all kinds of, you know, just all kinds of neat things. And they are, you know, part of a process that's, I think, is going to just really catch all over the country. And I want you to meet him, so I'm not going to say any more. So it's Carol Evans and Jon Griggs.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. It's really exciting for me to be in Boston. I've never seen it, and it's a lot greener, wetter, and flatter than where I come from. So, yeah. First of all, I want to say that all the things that I've been hearing yesterday, last night, and today have really fascinated me because they're helping me connect the dots for all the things that I see out in the landscape. And so this is just such a great opportunity for me. Also, I really want to express my appreciation for Jon Griggs, who will be following my presentation to talk a little bit about the same things that I'm going to share with you. Jon is really a leader in the livestock industry, and for me personally, he's been just an incredible partner in working me with streams. Oh, is this better? I'm sorry. Okay. No. If you didn't hear me, I really wanted to express my appreciation for Jon Griggs, the manager of Maggie Creek Ranch, who is here with me to do this presentation. Jon has been, personally, he's been just an incredible partner for me for about 20 years in our efforts to rehydrate Nevada and work on these streams. So this is a story about cows, beaver, and collaborative stewardship. This is a story about how those of us who were concerned about streams in Nevada started with grazing practices that created conditions that look like this, about how those of us who were interested in working together changed those grazing practices and it created conditions that look like this, about how those conditions attracted the beaver and how the beaver came in and created these magnificent wetlands that went for miles and miles. This is also a story about how when the beaver left, those collaborative grazing practices are continuing today, and now we have water in the face of the worst drought that Jon and I have ever seen in our careers. Hydrologic drought. We've had rain, but this is an important distinction. The drought we're referring to is the one that puts water in the streams. So this picture right here on Susie Creek is year 4 of this severe drought, and we have water. By the way, this is a lot of water in Nevada. I need to clarify that. So this is also a story about a place that's far away and dry and big. And so I just wanted to show you the district that I work in, the northeast corner of Nevada, is over 2 times the size of Massachusetts. So it's big. And we have a lot of public lands out west, and Nevada is a really big public land state. 75% of Nevada is either BLM or Forest Service lands. And I really want to emphasize to everyone here, those are your lands. We actually have a lot of trout streams in the Elko District in Nevada. We have over 1,200 miles of perennial trout streams just on the yellow, which is BLM land there. The green is Forest Service. And I want to focus a lot of what I'm going to say on watersheds. I want to talk about things at watershed scales. So the 2 watersheds that I've highlighted, a lot of what I'm going to share with you comes from these watersheds. One of them has Lahontan cutthroat trout are listed threatened species. The other, we hope to reestablish them someday. And this is Susie and Maggie Creeks. And collectively, these 2 areas, well, it looks like 3. It's really 2. There's a little error in the GIS layer. That's really 1 watershed, and that's the second. Collectively, this is about 600 square miles, so our scales are big. And also, I need to tell you this story. I need to tell you about how livestock grazing works on public lands with BLM. When I say BLM, I mean Bureau of Land Management. So we license grazing by allotments, and I've superimposed a couple of allotments over the Maggie and Susie Creek watersheds. 3 of these allotments, Jon Griggs grazes, the McKinley FFR, the Carlin Field, and the Hadley allotment. And a couple important points I want to make here is, number one, they're big. The smallest one there is 17,000 acres. The largest one is over 70,000 acres. We do have an allotment on the district that's about 380,000 acres. So that's one point. The second point I want to make is that notice all the white in there? The white is private lands. And these private lands are intermingled with the public lands. And that's really, really important to telling this story. We cannot fence out all these white out of the yellow, because you'll see from the pictures of the topography, it's just not feasible. So whatever we do on public lands, we really need to coordinate with the private landowners. And it's a beautiful place. If you haven't been to Northeastern Nevada, if you spend any time there, you'll fall in love with it. It's a beautiful place. And it's a place where water's everything to us out there. So in telling this story, I need to tell you about how bad this drought is. We've had rain, but our streams are based on snowmelt, and we have not really had a snowpack for 4 years. This is a Red Cow Creek I don't know if they're still there, they might be there in a puddle, but red band trout, another one of our native trout, probably for thousands of years, and I don't know if they're still there anymore. But mostly, this is a story about collaborative stewardship. It's a story about people getting together and with a common vision and looking, what can we do in the land together. John is in this John is in this picture, and this was 2012, I think, John, and we hosted a tour out. People came from Utah, from conservation organizations, from state and federal government to see what was going on out there. So to tell this story, I need to tell you a little bit about how streams and riparian areas function in Nevada. Streams are the riparian zone is often referred to as the green strip along the streams, or another way to look at it, it's the interface between the water and the uplands. And these areas, these riparian zones, are so important for how streams function in Nevada. They dissipate energy of flowing water, they stabilize stream banks, they store and capture sediment and water, they recharge aquifers, and they're a source of tremendous biodiversity. So I said we license grazing on public lands. That's one of our jobs at BLM. And those grazing leases are typically issued from about March or April to all the way till October or November. And if left to their own devices, when things get hot, cattle will concentrate on these streams. It's the only source of green forage and water. And the results of that can be pretty bad. This is a stream. I just retook that bottom picture about a month ago on the East Fork of Beaver Creek. I've been watching this stream since 1988, and it had a lot of hot season grazing, most of those ensuing years. And when a big event came along in 2006, it downcut to form basically a gully. And as you've already heard in this conference, that's just a conveyance system to drain the land. And so what was a hydrated mesic floodplain is now a terrace. It's now uplands invaded by sagebrush, which is an upland species with a long taproot. So we've lost a lot of water and a lot of storage as a result of those grazing practices. Now, when I was in college in the 1970s, I'll never forget a range class that I had that the professor said, riparian areas are sacrifice zones, so never mind, just manage the uplands. Assume you're going to waste the riparian area. So I think in the 1980s, people became a lot more cognizant of the value of riparian areas. And so a lot of things that we did on this district and other places, we built exclosures. And by an exclosure, I mean no grazing on one side and bad grazing practices on the other. And after about 25 years of messing around with these things, I can tell you they're pretty much an unmitigated disaster. You can see, I don't know if you can see the exclosure fence. They're little fenced areas. And more often than not, the insides look like the outsides. The fences are hard to maintain. They're barriers to wildlife. But more importantly, as you guys all know, a stream is an expression of the condition of the watershed. So if you have too much water being shed or too much sediment being shed from the watershed, your exposure is not going to do you a lot of good. So beginning in the 90s, I think in the West and in my district and a lot of places, people got more interested in figuring out how could we graze the outside in such a manner as that looked on the inside. And so this was sort of the riparian pasture or the riparian grazing concept. And this is something that I've been involved with most of my about 27 or so years on the Elko District. I'm always really interested in finding ways that you can still graze riparian areas. There's a lot of different ways. There's a ton of different things that work. This is just a few I pulled out to give you the concept. When it says spring, fall, rest, that means one year it's grazed early, the next year it's grazed in the fall, the next year it's rested. And these are done by large scale, like big pastures, might be many thousands of acres. The bigger the better generally. But the one thing that these all have in common is they reduce the frequency and duration of hot season grazing, and that's really the key. There's just a million ways to do it, but that's the key, because that allows the plants to have some opportunity to recover, even if it's in part of the season or in some year in between other years. So that really drives recovery. I want to show you some examples of that. So on the Elko District, we have this wonderful collection of old stream photos and data on all the streams on the district. These surveys were done in the late 70s and early 80s. And a couple things stand out from these early surveys. Number one, the streams were really degraded. They were wide, they were shallow, they had very little riparian vegetation. And the other thing was that those of us that were coming around in the 70s were poorly dressed. You should see, no, this guy's clothed at least. You know, you should see some of the ones I have. You wouldn't believe them. I even put a shirt on one for one time, but so, yeah, that aside. So working with the TS Ranch, who's owned by Newmont Mining Corporation, we have some large mines in the area. They own some of the ranches, and they're really interested in progressive conservation grazing. So we changed things in the early 90s. This is a combination of rest and use during part of the grazing season. And this stream, Coyote Creek, in the Maggie Creek Basin, has cutthroat trout, and you can see the habitat conditions are a lot better now for cutthroat trout. But we still graze it. We graze it all the time. It's just grazed in a different manner. This is actually an example from Susie Creek on the grazed by the Maggie Creek Ranch, 1978. It was before John was there. So, and we changed things in 91, 92, made a big riparian pasture. This is the results of early season grazing just 3 years later. So these areas are really, they have a lot of recovery powers. I mean, because of the water there, they're pretty remarkable recuperative powers. This is kind of one of my favorite slides. I took this in 1988, and I always said, this would be just the coolest slide for a before slide for some presentation somewhere down the road. So it was. This is Beaver Creek in 1988. This is Beaver Creek in 2014, working with the 25 Ranch, just mixing things up a little bit, rest, early grazing, hot season grazing periodically, but it's allowed for recovery of this system. And there's cutthroat in this system as well. It's part of the Maggie Creek Basin. This picture was taken in 1988, a place called the West Fork of Beaver Creek. I just took this not very long ago, this summer, and that's just got short duration, kind of holding, gathering, short duration, hot season grazing. This is one of my favorite projects. This was a 1977 North Fork of the Humboldt River, miles of riverine canyon. Working with the Devil's Gate Ranch, we did a spring development and a pipeline system on the uplands, created a big riparian pasture, and they graze this in the spring or the fall every year. And over time, I've found that all of this for me is just an unfolding story. I'm really not quite sure what's going to happen next. And so I just sort of stand back and watch it and learn. So the most interesting thing for me of late has been the advent of beaver on a big scale in all these areas. And I'm going to show you a few examples of that. This is Maggie Creek in 1980. We started changing things in the early 90s with the TS Ranch and New Mining Corporation. And this picture is actually 2013, but in those ensuing years, somewhere between about 2003 and 2013, beaver came to occupy just basically the whole valley. This is a great picture. This is Susie Creek on an allotment that grazed by Maggie Creek Ranch. I took this picture in 1989. By 1991, it kind of looked the same, but we also had completed a riparian pasture fence that year. And by 1996, just switching the grazing to fall and spring, both in the same year, it started to heal. This floodplain started to heal with classic type recovery design, a narrow, deeper channel, a hydrated floodplain, and the willows starting to come in. And by 1998, or 99, the willows were getting pretty big. And by 2007, this whole valley bottom was full of beaver dams and wetlands. And just another example, Dixie Creek, 1989, changed to early season grazing, 1994. And when I went back there in 2010, there was a bunch of wetlands, a great big, huge bunch of wetlands. No, that wasn't me. I'm usually the one with the camera, so I obeyed all these pictures. But so this is kind of one of my favorite examples. This is a place called Indian Jack Creek, also in the Maggie Creek Basin. This is it was such a degraded, meager, sad little stream in 1992. Working with the TS Ranch again, changed the grazing practices to reduce hot season grazing. This is 98, early typical type recovery. And I show this picture because this was a big flood event in 2006, but it just shows really a lot of recovery. Because all the vegetation was growing up, and especially the willows, they trap all this sediment and all this alluvial material that fills the floodplain up. And I'll show you what that does, but keep your eye on this little cage. That's sort of a grass utilization cage for reference. By 2011, it looked like this. And it's because the plants grow and the plants trapped all this alluvial material, which provided a growth medium for the willows and so on. But this last year, I went upstream a little bit, and the beaver have found this place. And there's even waterfowl. So I thought this was so neat that this is just one of our most meager streams with the least flow, as it has attracted waterfowl in the worst drought we've ever seen. So really interesting. And incidentally, the cutthroat trout also found their way into this stream from the adjoining Maggie Creek. So one thing, I really want to emphasize, I'm always telling people, okay, the beaver, I think beaver populations have really increased a lot in recent years. But I always say, this is a grazing story. I got to tell you, this is a grazing story. And this stream, you can see that, same year, same stream, they're close together. There's just a fence separating them. This one had good grazing practices for about 20 years, not this one. And, you got to understand that the beaver, success of the beaver in these areas is tied to the health and functionality of the stream systems. So back to Susie Creek and Maggie Creek, I want to talk about, so what does all this mean at a big watershed scale in time and space? And I want to really emphasize that all these different entities that are listed, there's a number of ranches, including Maggie Creek Ranch, some of the mines in the area, state and federal governments, conservation groups, particularly Trout Unlimited. They've been a tremendous partner. National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. There's all these partners. And it really takes all these partners. Everyone has something that's invaluable to contribute to this effort. Grazing wasn't the only thing we worked on in these basins. As I mentioned, Maggie Creek has cutthroat trout. Some of our partners helped us replace impassable culverts and irrigation structures with structures suitable for fish passage. So I got really interested in working with some other folks in trying to quantify this stuff at big scales, stuff that had been in place 20 or so years. And so, of course, remote sensing offers an excellent way to do that. So we worked with a couple partners and contracted out some studies. And the first one was with a firm called Open Range Consulting in Park City, Utah. And we found that between 1994, remembering that we started changing things right about 92, 93, riparian vegetation in most of the major streams in the basin increased by over 800 acres. And then we contracted a second study looking at the whole basin with Whitehorse Associates in Logan, Utah, and they showed that between just 4 years, between 2006 and 2010, riparian and water, they were mixed together. It was hard to separate some of these things with the remote sensing techniques. Increased by 466 acres. Percent of water marsh combination increased by 26 acres. Length of stream corridor with water and marsh increased by 7 miles. Transition areas increased by almost 800 acres. And by transition, that's kind of an important thing. What that is, as the water table comes up, upland species like rabbit brush and sagebrush die out, and they're replaced by species associated with more mesic conditions. So when you have that many acres in transition, that's a real measure of the water table coming up at a big scale in that valley. And finally, this, I love this slide. People that like beaver will like this slide. This from Whitehorse Associates, showing this whole basin, which is almost 400 square miles. Just in 4 years, the active beaver dams went from 107 to 271. So beaver are increasing, but they're taking advantage of the good habitat that's out there. And then ponding, shown there by the blue water, ponded water behind beaver dams, increased by 9 miles in this basin. So this is a view of the whole thing from the air, and I showed this to a friend in Elko, and she goes, well, they're not going to think that's pretty, it's brown. But it's because it's brown because it was April and I was in a helicopter and things hadn't started growing. But really this shows a tremendous amount of water that's being stored in this valley. So one quick comment about channel evolution. Streams, especially in alluvial valleys like this, they'll cut down, form a gully, and then they'll take some time to broaden and create a new floodplain in between the cut banks. And actually that has to happen for recovery. But here, this probably cut down 100 years or so ago. So it's had a long time to widen. But here, the beaver have filled this, it's like a reservoir, full of water and plants at a big scale. So, and there's some shallow wells scattered around both Maggie and Susie Creeks. The mine put those in to track their dewatering. So one of these wells was right next to where we had a beaver dam. And so it was put in to track mine dewatering, which didn't show up here. But what did show up was just an incredible rise in the shallow aquifer across from the beaver dam here. So this goes from 94 up to 2015. That's like September of 94, September and so on. But what we saw was a lot of fluctuation early on and then a steady rise in the water table and probably about 2 feet of additional storage, even through the face of the worst drought that we've seen. It was just really amazing to see this. So, and then the same thing for the Susie Creek Basin. We contracted with our partners, Trout Unlimited, and they used a combination of aerial and satellite imagery to quantify changes at big scales. Again, we have these old broadened out gullies, bare in 91, changed grazing right around 92, 93 at a watershed scale. And you can see everything filling up in here with beaver dams and riparian vegetation and water, even in 2013, which was extremely dry. And here's a summary of their findings. Over the past 20 to 30 years, riparian vegetation increased by 100 acres. Beaver dams went from 0 to 139. Open water increased by 20 acres. Length of wetted stream increased by 3 miles. And there was a 32% increase in photosynthetic activity when you took out the effects of fire and drought or precipitation. So, and also, we also just happened to have a shallow well across from this beaver dam complex. We saw the same sort of pattern here, rise in the shallow aquifer and being maintained through the tremendous drought conditions. So, you know, everybody kind of, I think, knows that beaver are keystone species. A lot of wildlife are attracted to the wetlands and wonderful habitat created by beaver. But I really like to think about them as an ecosystem species, or maybe more accurately as a landscape species. I sort of see them now, after standing back and watching things so long, as one step perhaps in a series of steps necessary to reclaim and rehydrate historic terraces and make them floodplains again, or historic floodplains that are terraces now. So to show you that, we'll go back to Susie Creek in 1989. I told you things got better when we changed the grazing. I told you the plants came in that were sufficient to sustain the beaver. But what I didn't tell you was the beaver moved on. They alter their habitat often in such a way that it's time for them to leave, but that's part of the process. So it was fascinating for me to watch Susie Creek now, in 2012, transition into a cattail marsh, and by 2014, it's on its way to becoming a wet meadow. And I just took this probably about a month and a half ago, and I think it's on its way, it's on its journey to probably reclaiming and rehydrating these terraces that the stream used to flow up here. It's this whole valley is filling in with water and sediment. And perhaps most importantly, my huge interest here for all these years has been to try and get cutthroat trout back in this system. And I think if we have a narrow, deep channel in a meadow setting, we might get the temperatures cool enough to where we can do that. So what I want to emphasize again, it does not work out very well if we don't have the grazing right. It's too much stress on a stream system. So, if the beaver cut the woody willow or aspen and the cows eat the regeneration, or the beaver accumulates sediment behind a dam, and instead of becoming a meadow, it'll wash out or we'll lose the woody plant communities. So you've got to get the grazing right to make this all work. And so I say, well, the beaver story is a grazing story, but then I say, well, wait, I'm not really telling you the whole story. It's really a story about collaborative stewardship. You really, as I said, there's so much private land out there, and the person who's on the ground working with the livestock, they really have to be engaged and be a part of this story. It's not going to work. So this was a tour John and I both were involved with just a couple months ago. This is the Maggie Basin is here. Susie Creek Basin's just over the hill. But this is the head of the Fish and Wildlife Service in Reno, the president of the Nevada Cattlemen's Association, and just a lot of other folks. Really wanted to come out in the ground and see what was going on and seeing what was working. But it's a story about collaborative stewardship. So with that in mind, I have a illustration to go with this quote. A dear friend of mine who just retired from the Forest Service said it best. And she said, it seems like life's blank canvases are the beautiful riparian areas that are being restored through collaborative stewardship. So I love that, painted such a picture in my mind. And so we'll take the blank canvas of Susie Creek in 1978, and we'll fill it in, we'll paint it in with conditions that bring us up to the worst drought that John and I have ever seen. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a tough act. How about if I hold it down here? Is this better?
You guys
Good.
put the next slide up for us.
That's a tough act to follow, clearly.
That is a
Yeah, hide behind the hat.
all right.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having us here. And it's just an incredible experience for me, and incredibly smart people here that I'm learning a lot from. And as you're about to find out, clearly I'm not one of them, but we're going to press on. So these are two pictures of really the same thing. This is my piece of the pie that Carol Evans was talking about in the bigger picture. This is Maggie Creek Ranch as I know it. The left picture is a Google Earth image. The red outline is really the outline of the ranch. The ranch's outside border. And like Carol's pictures, the yellow checkerboard, the yellow portion is your land, federal land managed by Bureau of Land Management. The uncovered part is deeded land here belonging to Maggie Creek Ranch. So each one of these squares is a square mile or a section, 640 acres. And I'm sure you've done the math already, but that's about 200,000 acres right there. That's about what that ranch is. So roughly 35 miles this way, which to you in Boston is a 10-hour drive, and about 10 or 15 miles wide right there. So I put this map on here just really because I like it. But this part's Maggie Creek right here. And you can almost kind of see the riparian pastures that go along with it. And then Susie Creek flows through here. And you can kind of see that as well. But like I say, really, I just like that map because it kind of reminded me of the Ponderosa. Bangity bangity bang badang bonanza. Sorry. My presentation probably just peaked right there, I think. Sorry about that. So Maggie Creek Ranch, like most Nevada ranches, is a very traditional outfit in that we work our cattle a horseback, and we do things not unlike the first people that worked cattle a horseback did. Very, very traditional in our thinking and how we handle cattle. And our cattle are on a rest rotation grazing system. To put it most simply, our grazing goal with our cattle is to let every plant reach seed head maturity every year. So Carol talked about how we receive our moisture as snowpack. So we're in a 10-inch precip zone here, most of that being snowpack, a little bit of rain in the spring, a little bit in the fall. So our cattle have to move a lot to accomplish that goal, and they do, and we do that a horseback. So ranchers in Nevada kind of learned a hard lesson a long time ago. And the way we do things now is we actually supplement feed our cattle in the winter at our headquarters operation, which was on the bottom part of the screen of that map. And then they move out and back in the grazing season. And we learned this lesson really before my time, because when the events that can happen is you can get a couple of feet of snow in Nevada in a cold front, and then bitter cold behind it, and the snow will crust like that right there, and it makes it really difficult for a cow to get to the forage. And then bitter cold behind it, so her nutritional requirement went up exponentially, and she can't get to forage, and the only water that she's going to have is the snow that she's going to eat. So those kind of events eventually will tip cows over, and the cows that survive that will have done so because they aborted their calves, and clearly that's not good for a cattleman. So we kind of learned early on that we needed to be rest rotating. We needed to be out and back. The thing that you can't see in this slide is that when I took this picture, it was about 0 degrees. And we started that day at about 20 below. So I just wanted to say that no cows were harmed in the making of the slide, nor horses, but the cowboy was not very happy. So we already had this kind of a system of rest rotation, and our cows are moving a lot. And then in the early 90s, this nice lady here came to my predecessor, the ranch manager before me, and said, "Let's do something about this, can we?" And, it wasn't a stretch really for us. This is Susie Creek where we're standing, and one side of it, almost all the way up for us, was fenced already. So it was pretty easy to make riparian pastures by fencing out the other side. So Carol was looking at this, wanting this. And about that time, 1991, I started my career at Maggie Creek Ranch. I hired on as a cowboy. I was 10 or 11 years old at the time. And I'm embarrassed to admit to you that I didn't know the problem with this. This was kind of my normal. And the thing about this, I assume this was July. 7 means July. Yes. Yeah. So to me, this was a pretty dang good July because there's water right here. For most of my early years at Maggie Creek Ranch, Susie Creek dried up in the summer. That's station S7. That was actually okay, sorry about that. So water had started to come back, so it wasn't an exceptional year. But cow's water requirement is obviously highest when it's the hottest, and when it was the hottest, there was no water here. So that wasn't doing us a whole lot of good. So So to my mind, as a young cowboy working here, I thought, well, what are we, why? What are we doing? Well, you've seen the results of why. So we did that. We made riparian pastures. We figured out how to use them, and they started coming back pretty good, pretty quickly, really. And then these guys came along, and really the star of the show, probably. And agrarian Americans want to control what we can control because there's so much we can't. We can't control the weather so much. We can't really control our markets a lot. We can't do much about regulation. But these guys, when they come along, we can do something about. And so, Susie Creek, this was on Susie Creek. Susie Creek was coming back really good. We had a lot of willows coming in, and then these guys showed up. And I was a little bothered by it. And I asked Carol, what do we do? And Carol, being Carol, said, well, let's find out. Let's wait and see. Let's watch. And so we did. The interesting thing to me about beaver is that, we stockmen, we farmers, ranchers, we have control issues, but really we have so much in common with these guys. Really. The thing is, my whole culture revolves around the work. Revolves around the work of what I do. That's the whole center of the culture. Same with these guys. We're really strongly family oriented. Same with these guys. I love to swim. No, I really don't. I come from a desert. No, that doesn't tie in. But there's really a shift in our thinking in Nevada, and I'm proud of it. Just last month, we had a workshop. A bunch of ranchers in our area came to, and it was about the good that they did, but it was also how to mitigate the impacts for places like one of the guys at the workshop. Well, where the workshop was conducted, a lazier member of this family was building structures underneath a bridge, which isn't really cool. So how do a few years ago, not too long ago, he would have paid the ultimate price for that. Now we figured out how to build structures that discourage him, and we can live trap that guy and take him where he's needed. So we're coming along in our thinking. We're doing pretty good. We're not there yet. There's a lot of us that still have the control issue, but we're getting there. So Jim asked me to talk a little bit about symbiosis. Is there symbiosis between ranchers and beavers? Well, I'm learning more about that word, but I think that's kind of a stretch, really. I think for us to not blow up their world, and I mean that literally, is not symbiosis. But what I will tell you is that this area is a water gap, we call it, and it's not a very good picture because it was taken by me. But this fence goes here, then goes across, and then it comes back over here. So this area is about 135 feet wide, and cows can water here. They can't have access to the pasture as a whole, but cows from the upland pastures can water here. And this is not a real good representation of a water gap because they're usually more disturbed than this. But I took this picture because there's beaver activity in it. This is not a beaver. This is my dog Cruiser. I told him to get out of the picture, but he wouldn't. He's bad that way. So there's beaver in this water gap, but what is interesting to me in my undereducated and clearly biased mind is that everywhere we have one of these water gaps, there's probably 7, I think, maybe 8 on Susie Creek and Maggie Creek both that we use. Everywhere there's one of these, there's beaver activity above it and or below it, usually and. And why would you think? Well, I don't know. You guys are smarter than me. But to me, I know that beaver need as much mud as they do wood. and we do disturb this quite a bit, and it makes easy mud. So to me, that's the answer, but smarter people than I will figure that out. So they did their deal. And the thing is, you look all the way across this, and it's wet all the way across there. And the thing that I tell my peers is that why don't you want this to happen? Why don't you want to slow this water down and put it to work for you? Why do you want it to leave your place so quickly? Well, there's willows, get over that. Look at all this water. Why don't you want that? Well, we're getting there. I'm an optimist, but we're getting there. People are starting to see that. The analogy I use is that when everybody's in a box and one person steps out of the box, the initial reaction is for everybody to drag him back in. And there's a few of us that are out of the box, and we're being pulled on a little bit, but we're dragging people out too, and we're getting there. So this right here is the money shot for me. This is the money shot. This is, you can still see water. This is good wet meadow. This is forage that I can use. But Carol talked to you about the severe drought we're in. And I told you that we're in a 10-inch precip zone. You're probably thinking, 10-inch precip zone, well, how can you tell you're in drought? And that's a fair question. But the thing is, we had enough rain to grow forage up here, but there's a lot of my peers that are hauling water to their stock. And there's a lot of stock wells that are going dry from the water table falling. And there's, even our ranch, we've depopulated our cow herd something like 30% in the last 4 years. A lot of cows are leaving Nevada, and it's because of drought. And it's not because of the forage, it's because of this stuff right here. And in 2015, to go across Nevada and see this right here, that's really pretty incredible. That's the money shot. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's why it's worked for us, really. This is a book I read. It's kind of popular in my culture. This guy, Ed Hanks, cowboyed a lot of the same ranches I did 70 years before I did. And this paragraph right here, I'd like to read to you. Fenton Fulkerson and his wife Josie came to Nevada in the early 1860s and lived here the rest of their lives, so they can really be counted as Nevada pioneers. Fenton used to tell me how the creeks on the north side of the Humboldt River ran almost on top of the ground. The creeks ran almost on top of the ground when he came to the country. These creeks, Maggie Creek, Susie Creek, I'm from Nevada, I say creek, sorry. Creek is what I mean, creek. These creeks, Maggie Creek, Susie Creek, Rock Creek, and Antelope Creek, to name a few, overflowed and made an abundance of feed for livestock. This applied to the creeks in northern Elko County too. These creeks today have washed down to bedrock, and it isn't easy to get the water out, so there isn't so much feed. That's powerful to me. That's a powerful piece of intelligence. These creeks ran almost on top of the ground. That told me why we should be doing this. In my lifetime, I probably won't see that go away. I probably won't see these creeks behaving like they should, going across valley to valley, creating all this feed all the way across. But we've made great strides since I've been there, and we'll keep doing so. And this is going to happen more in Nevada. But there's challenges to this, and I'll talk about that a little bit. Obviously, wildland fire is one of them. This picture was taken a half a mile from my house. I'm not going to talk about fire today. I'm going to come back when you invite me, and that's a different talk for a different time. But I'll tell you that we're doing stuff about this too. But clearly, you've probably heard about fires in the West this year. Washington, Oregon, California were just devastated this year, and there's things we can do about that. That's your teaser. Other challenges. Who knows this guy? Somebody tell me this guy. Anybody know him? Thank you. Very good, Cliven Bundy. If anybody guessed my dad, I was leaving. This is Cliven Bundy. He and his neighbors some 25 years ago, and Carol, you throw something at me if I get any of the story wrong. Some 25 years ago, he and his neighbors shared a common allotment, common grazing allotment, and their numbers were severely reduced to try to preserve the desert tortoise. And Mr. Bundy fought it and lost, and he continued to run his cows at full numbers and fought it and lost again, and still runs his cows some 20-some years later. And last year he gained notoriety. He was in the news. BLM finally decided to try to gather those cows, and some armed militiamen came to his aid and nearly had a shooting war with BLM Rangers. So that's one extreme. Who knows that guy? Anybody know that guy? This guy is John Marvel, and he's from Sun Valley, Idaho. Mr. Marvel thinks there should be no cattle at any time on public land in the West. Other activities should be reduced as well, but he's militant about his hate for cattle on public lands. The thing about his organization that he founded, Western Watersheds Project, they figured out that the way to try to get cows off public lands is to sue BLM over procedure. So if I had a big project that I wanted to do, BLM went through the paperwork hoops of doing it. If in the middle of that, they put it out to public comment. A group like Mr. Marvel's Western Watersheds protests that, goes through the BLM process of protests. It eventually ends up in a court, and if Mr. Marvel or his group or groups like him take BLM to court over, say, 50 points of procedure, we're not talking about the actual end project. You know, we're not talking about building fence or doing a thinning junipers or something like. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the process to get there. If that group prevails in court over, say, any one of those 50 points of procedure, and I didn't say when, prevail, then BLM has to pay its court costs thanks to the Equal Access to Justice Act. So he's been pretty successful with that. And the other thing that's happened that they've kind of figured out is that a couple of years ago, we had a pipeline come through, a gas pipeline, Ruby Pipeline, and it was a big money project. And Mr. Marvel's group said, "You're in the way of this bird right here. You're not going to do it. We're going to see that you don't do it." So Ruby Pipeline Company threw $14 million, something like $14 million to study this bird at their group. So those are the two extremes that Carol and I are living in, but in the middle of somewhere. I'm proud to cover up those ugly men with this pretty female right here. This is a greater sage grouse hen, and you may have heard about her recently. Recently in the West, we avoided a decision from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service to list this bird as endangered or threatened. And probably a big part of the reason why we did that is because BLM and Forest Service published this, would you say that's about 4 inches? Yeah, say 4 to 6 inches of plan. That's document plan, 4 to 6 inches of plan to it's a plan for this bird, how they're going to manage the ground for this bird. And for stockmen, we really don't know so much what's in that plan that's going to hurt us. There's some things that are concerning to us, but other resource users in Nevada are pretty upset about it and are suing BLM over this plan. The thing about this plan, the thing that's cumbersome and really hard for Carol and I is that this plan doesn't replace any other plan. This plan stacks on top of other plans that are similar in size. So while there may be things in this plan that supersede other plans, when Carol and I agree that we want to build 850 feet of fence on one of these riparian pastures to help us manage it better, now Carol has to go through this plan and all the plans before it, and before I can pound a post or stretch a wire, there's well over a year of navigating this stuff. And the bad thing about that is I'm going to lose Carol Evans because of that. And I'm going to lose a lot of good young people that want to be out here with the bird and instead are shuffling through that paper. And that's kind of an important take-home message from me to you, is that we need more people on the ground and less people planning, maybe. I'm glad you see the value in that. Thank you. But there's opportunity. There's lots of opportunity happening out there I wanted to talk about as well. These little guys are Columbia spotted frog. They're not as sexy as sage-grouse apparently, because they just got a no listing as well. And we have them on Maggie Creek Ranch, and we've had opportunity to do some projects because of these little guys. Turns out they love a good grazing, which I appreciate. But we also need to protect their water source, which we've done in some areas. In the middle here is the other star of the show, the hunt and cutthroat trout. As Carol told you, that's kind of an ongoing story for us, but we're really excited about our partnerships with Trout Unlimited and the other folks for that fish, because we've learned that good trout habitat turns out to be pretty good cow habitat too. But the thing I wanted to tell you about public lands is, BLM all the agencies are under the multiple use concept. We've got to manage public lands for multiple use. So what that can feel like to us is like, say I'm the caterer and this half of the audience wants filet mignon and this half of the audience wants prime rib. So I'm the caterer, BLM, you all get chicken. It can feel like that. But the thing is, the thing that's important to me, the thing that's shifted my thinking is that I had this nice young lady open my eyes for me. It's easy for, my situation is a little bit different. I'm a hired manager. I'm not a multi-generational rancher, but we have more of those than my situation in Nevada. Multi-generational ranchers, it's pretty easy to get in your box, and your box gets generations deep, right? So when you have a person like Carol say, hey, can we work on this riparian area? How can you, the thing that Carol did for us is she had a little bit of a hammer in that, we have to make it better. But really she said, how can we make this work for you? And when you start having that attitude and you start seeking out other people like this nice guy from Trout Unlimited and some folks from Fish and Wildlife Service, then you open your eyes to other possibilities. And one of our partners is Susan Abel from Fish and Wildlife Service, and she opened my eye to this guy. Who knows what that is? Anybody? Go. That's right, monarch caterpillar, right? What's this plant? Milkweed, yeah. I'm embarrassed to tell you that 2 years ago I would have really thought about, what invasive is that? Now I'm pleased to tell you that we actually have a lot of that. And, I'm proud to tell our cousins in the Midwest that, hey, we got your back. We're growing these things. And there's lots of opportunity that comes with that. So this is the same tour that Carol showed you, and really, this is it at the end of the day. So we talked about the head of Fish and Wildlife Service standing next to the Nevada Cattlemen's Association president. We've got our good upstream neighbors, the Hagees. We've got land managers, the head of the BLM here. We've got Nevada Division of Environmental Protection. We've got biologists from BLM and Nevada Department or Division. I get those wrong all the time. Nevada Department of Wildlife. And then we've got this guy back here, clearly just there for looks. But that's, in Nevada, that's about as a diverse group on the landscape as you can imagine. And really, to me, what we did on that tour was we got these leaders and we showed them what us folks on the ground are doing. And what I want you to take from us today, and Carol too to some extent, is that there's good folks out there doing good stuff, really. And we know now how important this is back here, how important our water is to us, how important clean water is to us, and we know how to make it happen. And we're telling that story more back there than we are obviously out here. But it's coming along, and you can hopefully take some comfort in that. And at times when you hear about passive management, when you hear about, well, let's leave the West alone, let's let it go back to pre-European influence, think about these people out here working hard, if you would please, and know that when we actively manage these systems, and even when a cowman's out there, we can make good things happen. Thank you. Now I'm going to lope off into the West.
Actually, John, you could stay right up here because we have question and answers. And oh, it's on. So maybe the way to handle the question and answer is John and Jim Laurie and Carol Evans could come right up here and use this mic. And if you have a question, I can bring you the mic to ask it. Anybody? For all three. Walter?
Yeah. Look, thank you very, very much. It was very good. The question simply, John, Carol, have you got any data on stream bed rising with the beavers, the sediments and the grassy meadows? Because in a sense, you've got 150 years, you've got 10 feet, 8 feet to make up. So from the BLM point of view, hey, that's a critical natural capital rehabilitation story. And yeah, any indications of that?
Oh, I can use this one, I guess. You know, that's my next big question. I want to know that, and I've been thinking a lot about that at this conference, and also trying to quantify the carbon in there and just different attributes of the soil. That's a question that's the next one. Thanks, I don't have it yet. So.
Do you know how a guy like me can measure that? Because I'm going to bend your ear later. Because we want to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want people to help us here figure it out.
But
So.
you'd have some reference stakes or old fence posts?
Yeah, unfortunately not. You know, on another stream, I do have some surveyed cross sections back from, it was like 1989 or so. This particular area, I don't. So we're going to have to get creative. And you know, one way you could almost do it, I do have some information on from the top of those cut banks down to the stream bed when it was degraded, that height.
Yeah.
It's like 17-something feet, but now we could take some measurements that way
Also,
too.
you can take a simple auger down
Yeah,
the
right,
sediment,
exactly.
and then we have
Yeah.
to stratify it, and
That's-
you get the gravels from when it was, when you
Yep.
got there, stage 10.
I would love. We want that information. Anybody wants to help us, we'll take the help. So.
Questions? Here's one of our... Okay.
They talked about the beaver coming. Did they just kind of like, they hitchhiked? They sort of each other by a drumming system?
Did you see Field of Dreams?
We're actually on schedule.
Build it and they will come.
Well, yeah, we'll get you up there at 2:50.
You know, That's a very good question. I want to talk about that a little bit myself. That's, in my clearly undereducated, biased mind, I feel like they went overland quite a ways to get to Susie Creek. I feel like they came from Maggie Creek, and yeah. But how did they know to hike there? That's what I don't know. I know there was water places along the way that probably, you know, were some kind of sanctuary, but why? Why did they do it? I don't know. And Maggie Creek and Susie Creek both run into the Humboldt River, but it doesn't seem logical to me that they would have gone down and then back up, because there was not enough contiguous places to encourage them to do that.
Questions?
I don't need it. I can do it.
All right.
What's the difference between a beaver dam and a man-made dam that makes it so that the fish migration is not help?
Yeah.
What's
we're
the
using
difference
this
between
for the people in the hall.
Gotcha, sure.
How can fish navigate a beaver dam when they can't navigate a man dam? Take that one.
Okay, well, I don't know if I can tell you exactly, but I do know that there's some good research coming out on that, and it's just showing they find a way through. Beaver dams leak in areas, they have little passage areas, the different flow conditions. Some of the research that I'm familiar with is all saying that they're generally not much of a barrier. And you know, you have to think too, the fish and the beaver were getting along pretty good for a long time ago, without us interfering. So, yeah.
The thing I've noticed in my clearly undereducated mind is that they, if you saw in the picture with the dog, there was a channel there. Beavers make those. They make, when they move into an area for a long time, they make channels that they can swim through, you know, because they swim so much faster. And I'm sure that's a good spot for a, sure that's a good spot for a fish to get around.
Hi there. I just want to say that the beavers are smarter than we are, because there was a conference here at Harvard a week ago, and they were talking about why we keep building where we shouldn't be building. And here they are. The beavers know how to go and do what they're supposed to do naturally, while people naturally do the wrong thing.
Well, that is so very right. And the other thing that I would say is that you can spend great gobs, mountains of money to try to replicate what beavers can do for free. That's a personal, painful lesson.
Hi, I'm wondering if you could all speak for a moment about how we can replicate this amazing work you're doing. John, on your end, are you on a speaking circuit and spreading the word among ranchers, and are you being well received or not? And Jim, your work with the students, homeschoolers, we need to replicate that in every classroom in the world, really. And how do we start doing that? I have my 12-year-old daughter's science teacher coming out to my backyard in a week to talk about how to tell this story, and I'm hoping that she'll spread the word in my hometown. But we need more of this everywhere. And what do you suggest we do to make that happen? Yes, I live in Concord, Mass, and when we moved into our yard, it was a green lawn over the entire acre. It was very much like a golf course, and that was because the prior owners were golfers. And when my husband and I were looking for a new house, we looked at the property and we saw tremendous potential, because we're both environmentalists. My husband's an environmental attorney, I'm a biologist. And we saw the great potential here to unbuild it and see them come back. And in a very short time, with the help of the beavers, our backyard was restored with the removal of the invasives and the return of many, many species. And so my daughter's 7th grade science teacher is really interested in this as a backdrop for her teaching of her students, and I'm trying to help her bring in the whole climate story and how we can all do something on our own piece of land, whether it's an acre or less, or hundreds of acres. And so I'm wondering if you have thoughts about how, since the clock is ticking, how can we spread this around so that everybody's doing it?
Let me go. So to me, there's two parts to your question. Part A was, can I keep my mouth shut? No, I don't. I go on quite a bit, really. Carol and I, and some of the people that we work with are speaking at the Nevada Cattlemen's Association convention next month. It's an exciting time right now in that the association current president, sees the value of this and has kind of made it the theme of his presidency. And like I said, we're not there yet with every rancher, but maybe the good news is there's not a whole lot of us out there. So we're coming along. Now I forget part two of the question.
Well, I was going to say something about students a little bit.
Oh, wait, no, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
okay, yeah,
I remember
okay.
part two.
Okay.
How do we do this? So for us, and I don't think really we're a lot different than a lot of people. Unfortunately, there has to be some hammer with the change. There has to be incentive to change, and it can't always be good, unfortunately. For us, there was a lot of hammers. There was drought. There was the ESA, Endangered Species Act listing. There's the threat of grazing permits being revoked, or numbers of grazing animals being drastically reduced. All those hammers make you think, well, I'll either be Clive and Bundy or I'll seek out change that's positive. And so I think a lot of people are. Climate change to me is not a good enough hammer in that it's too big of a concept for the everyday guy.
And Dee Dee here has some additional comments on that question.
Just in terms of the question about how do we make this really, in every classroom in the world, and also happening on farms and ranches around the world. So Peter Donovan, who started the Soil Carbon Coalition, is working on a new project called the Atlas of Biological Work, and it's going to be a global database that's kind of a combination of Google Earth and Wikipedia and Facebook, if you will. Basically, the idea is to make change visible in the way that we can look at Google Earth, where you will be able to drill down and see data about what's happening in terms of the water table, what's happening in terms of photosynthesis, what's happening in terms of changes in soil carbon, in productivity per inch of rainfall, and the learning resources that I'm developing in conjunction with all of you are basically to train people to be able to recognize what's happening and upload the data. And it'll all be on apps, on cell phones, and easy peasy.
I just wonder if we get Peter out here to meet these folks. It'd be amazing.
He's going to be in Nevada this winter, so we will make sure to connect you.
Yeah, great. Yeah. I just want to say from the student part, I have kids that grew up in the city, and you see pictures of John's daughter that's about the age of my kids, and she's learning how to rope and how to move cattle and do that kind of stuff and be on the land and learn from the land. And kind of my dream is that everybody can get reconnected with the land somehow. So my dream, my goal for this conference was to get Michael Kravchuk here and tell about this small water cycle, and they studied that and realized how big that idea is. But then Michael, is trying to learn how can we get nature to do this process, and these are the people I wanted to come to tell that story, and I wanted my kids to be in the middle of all that. And that was kind of how I thought of it. Is, they have a lot that they can share and learn how to actually do something on the land. And I'm trying to figure out how to teach that to adults. So that's why I wanted them up there. I wanted you guys to be thinking through the process when they were on stage. And so that's kind of my idea. But the idea of doing it everywhere, I'm up for that. Let's do it everywhere.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everybody.